This is the Bob Davis Podcast YouTube channel. This is the channel where we talk about the most recent podcasts at thebobdavispodcast.com. And the most recent podcast is podcast 1145, which is a travelogue from Idaho through Yellowstone on down here to Quartzsite, where I am today. It's a little windy today. We're getting some high winds, and so I am inside Mobile Podcast Command today. You'll still be able to hear the wind. For people who say, why do you wear headphones? It's because we are often recording outside and in a very windy environment, even in this vehicle. And I hate the sound of wind in the microphone, so I want to be able to monitor what's going on. And that's why I have headphones on. Plus, I was in radio for my whole life since I was 12, and I wear headphones because that's what I do. It isn't a gimmick. It's for real. Anyway, the last podcast 1145, is really a travelogue about feeling great because I was on the road again. And I was surprised at how quickly I was able to go from western Wisconsin across Minnesota down through, I kept calling it Sioux City, but it was Sioux Falls, South Dakota, across the bottom of South Dakota. And then I wanted to go to Little Bighorn, so I came up through Keystone and Lead and Deadwood on up to Little Bighorn. And I think I did I do a podcast about Little Bighorn? I think I did. Or at least, I know, that was when I was in that campground in Montana. And it was shortly after I left Little Bighorn, I did a podcast. It was about something else. It was about podcast 1144. And I got so wrapped up in the Little Bighorn story that I ended up, basically the whole video was about Little Bighorn. After Little Bighorn, which was really an amazing experience, I highly recommend it if you tour battlefields. And you'll hear why if you listen to podcast 1144. I'll put a link in the description box to podcast 1145, the Bob Davis Podcasts, where I talk about going through Yellowstone. So I came in through the north entrance and went all the way out through the west entrance down into, I guess it was Wyoming. And then the plan was to go down very shortly. I don't know how long it was in Wyoming. And then down into Nevada and then go south down through Nevada, coming all the way down to, I ended up in California on 95 South, came over at Parker, and went on down to Quartzsite, where I am right now. And there's a couple things I wanted to talk about. As you know, I've just finished a couple of videos about Quartzsite. I'm not going to talk too much about Quartzsite in this video. I will so at the end. So if you stay tuned through, I'll talk a little bit about the whole Quartzsite price increase for the long-term visitor areas. But I'm not going to add much to the videos I've done. Those videos have gotten a ton of views, and I thank you, and a ton of subscribers, and I thank you. I'm going to do an actual audio podcast kind of summarizing that whole experience, which will probably be podcast 1146. I don't know how much more I want to say. I have some philosophical views about the current time and what that means for places and camping areas like Quartzsite and the long-term visitor areas in Quartzsite. But I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of this video, and then I'll probably do a podcast about it at some point here. But I almost want to say, with that video, which did so well, something like, it's probably going to end up with well over 60,000 views at the end of the season, because so many people are interested in this price increase thing. My work in Quartzsite is done. I really don't. I don't need to, belabor the point or talk that much more about Quartzsite, Arizona, because that video kind of did the job. Let's just say that. This podcast is interesting because when I was in Montana, I was talking to the camp host at this campground where I was, and this is just after I left. I think it was actually It is right before you get to Little Bighorn. So you're in Montana, and there's a I don't even remember the highway that it was on, but I think it's highway. I think it's 20. I think it's US 20 or whatever. And there's a bunch of these campgrounds along the way. So I found a spot and I camped there. You pay, and I was talking to the camp host, and it was right before Labor Day, and he said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm going to go down to Yellowstone. And he said, well, you really ought to consider waiting until after Labor Day if you want to camp in Yellowstone. And I said, well, it's kind of a pass-through. I don't really have much desire to camp there. I'm just going to go through because it's been a long time since I've been in Yellowstone. And in the podcast, I devoted a considerable amount of time to getting down to Yellowstone. And then once I got there, driving through. And I kind of want to concentrate on the Yellowstone thing because I'm going to use the title for this podcast, for this video podcast, whatever you call it, this video on YouTube. I think I'm going to entitle it Yellowstone Bison Insanity. What's with the Yellowstone Bison insanity? We've all seen the videos on YouTube of people accosting these bison and being gored or attacked in this almost frantic effort to take pictures or have pictures taken with bison, which are, I guess, a relative to the buffalo. I don't know. I'm not a zoologist, so I don't know what species they are or anything else. I just know they're mean, and I don't get it. Yellowstone was full of people in rented cars from California or Wyoming or whatever, or people, families who were on a last chance power drive to to visit Yellowstone on Labor Day, and the traffic was not super bad, but what I saw was a lot of bad traffic manners, a lot of honking and screeching brakes, and people being literally mad to drive out to the road where the bison are. So I'm driving through Yellowstone, and in the podcast I told a story about the last time I was in Yellowstone, and I'll get to that in this video. I'm driving on the road, and I keep seeing long lines of cars, and I'm seeing people standing on the roofs of their vehicles, standing on the backs of pickup trucks, in the beds of the pickup trucks, having chairs, sitting in lawn chairs and stuff in the back of these pickup trucks, telephoto cameras, everybody snapping pictures, and there was nothing. I was like, what are they taking pictures? It took me a while to figure out that the bison were about a half a mile, maybe not even that far, a quarter of a mile out in the field, and these people were pulling over like maniacs to get their telephoto lenses out to take pictures of basically what account to me as hairy cows. I really don't understand it. If you go to Yellowstone and you camp, you go back in the bush, whatever, you're likely to see a black bear. You might see a bobcat, you might see a lynx, you might see some kind of a mountain lion. You better hope you don't see a grizzly bear. There seems to be this just over fascination with any kind of wildlife. Damn the torpedoes, and damn the potential danger, and damn the idea that you're going to disturb this animal. And just like the elk at the Grand Canyon, they tell you, elk are not very nice. They're not nice animals. And this is their natural habitat, and we leave them run and walk along the roads and everything else. And they do not necessarily want to interact with humans. I came out of the little camp office and this is at the Grand Canyon, and there was a girl in a convertible, and she was driving right up to the elk and looking at the elk. And I walked up to the left side. I was walking along the road, and I stay away from the things. I don't want to mess around with the elk. I name them, but I don't interact with the elk at all. Horses scare me, let alone elk. They're massive, and what I have learned is they are not friends of human beings necessarily. They're a little cantankerous, and she's pulling up next to the elk, and the elk is on the right side of the vehicle, and she's looking at the elk, and I walked up on the left side. I said, you know that those things don't like human beings, and that thing can destroy this vehicle. I wouldn't get this close to one. Paid no attention. Nothing happened, but that was the only busybody part of my Grand Canyon visit. I was in such a good mood that I just finally said, I'm not going to give people advice about animals. I don't know anything about them anyway, but I do know that you don't mess with the elk. And the bison are in that same category. They're wild animals. They are not happy wild animals. They don't like human beings, and they don't like being messed with, as these videos on YouTube attest to, people who have tried to take selfies and everything else. There is some kind of something with people who visit these national parks who are hell-bent for leather. They're, as I said, they are mad to get to one location setting so they can take a selfie, and then get to the next location so they can take another selfie. You see it at the Grand Canyon. People have literally fallen off the canyon taking pictures on the wall, which don't even get me started. And in Yellowstone, they've had to put, the park has put these orange cones up along the road, and they tell you, do not park here, do not walk along the road. And I couldn't figure out why they had done that in these sort of almost random places. And it took me, with my dim mind, a little bit of time to figure out that this is where the bison go, and this is that when they get close to the road, they don't want people stopping. So there were these traffic jams with people just literally throwing on their brakes and stopping and jumping out of their cars to take pictures of these animals. And it's nuts. Yellowstone, very busy. I knew it was going to be busy. I know that Labor Day is the busiest day, but in the last, I think it's 20 years, 69 million people have visited Yellowstone. It's the most visited national park, and there are some spectacular national parks. Obviously, my favorite is the Grand Canyon, but Zion is pretty great. Moab is pretty great. Lassen is actually pretty great as well. So it just depends. There's tons of great national parks, not just Yellowstone. And to be quite honest with you, I don't want to, there's some beautiful rock formations. There's some absolutely stunning moments. It's just that every time you pull over, 3 or 4 other people are going to pull over. And so you really don't ever have a moment where you are completely alone, which I'm going to touch on when I get to this quartzite review here in a second. You're never, really alone in these places. And they're so majestic. They're so incredible that being alone in a place like that is a whole different experience from being there with all of these tourists that that's why they built the parks, I guess, for people to visit them and see the beautiful sights. I can't say, oh, they shouldn't have done this, or people are crazy, what are they doing? This is these places are here, and people pay to go in to experience this natural phenomenon in these places, which has been preserved largely because there are so many places now in this country where we all live, apparently, whether it's Charlotte, North Carolina, or Chicago or New York City, where nature really is a thing of the past. Even for people who live outside of cities, they are living in housing developments in smaller towns, and you don't really have a full-on experience. And if you want to go someplace like Whitefish or Silverton, Colorado, or a small mining town that is pristine, let's just say, well, the Hollywood guys have already gotten there, and they've driven up the housing values, and they're no longer Whitefish. Forget about it. The price of. I remember going on the train to Whitefish with my son to go skiing at Glacier. Well, not Glacier, whatever that ski area is, Big Mountain, and it was just a down home. You could go get a pizza for $12 kind of place. Now, forget it. I mean, Whitefish, the buying a house in Whitefish is like trying to buy a house in Telluride or one of those ski areas, Snowmass or something, and forget it. You're not going to be able to afford that. So this is why I think people have figured out that if they rent an RV or they get an RV or they even just go in their car, they can experience and share this incredible natural experience that exists in the national parks. If we didn't have the national seashores, if we didn't have the national parks, if we didn't have these areas, they would literally be inundated and run an overrun with high-rise apartment buildings and resorts and places that the average person cannot afford. And this was the original reason in most of the major cities, New York in particular, why they invested so much. Chicago in the lakefront parks, in New York in Central Park and other parks, because it was essential to have these open spaces in urban areas where people could just breathe for a minute. I used to work with a guy, he's no longer with us. He was kind of a mentor, and he was the vice president of programming at radio programming at ABC News. No, ABC, just ABC Entertainment, whatever, the ABC radio networks. And he invented, I don't know how many formats. It was incredible. He's an incredible guy. And I used to say, when I'd go to New York to see him, I'd say, Bob, his name was Bob Henneberry. He's a really great legend in radio. And I said, where do you go in New York City what do you do, when things get too crazy? And this guy was, I think he was like 6'4", 6'5", and he looked like Commander Schweppes, if you remember that character, that advertising character. Big giant guy and a big white beard and deep baritone voice, and he used to say, Davis, I go to the MoMA Museum on 57th, and they have a little park behind the museum where there's sculptures and stuff, and I just sit there and ate my lunch every day, and that's where I go to just get a moment. And I think that's the value of the parks that is being served today. Many, many, many years ago, I went out, my friend Ted and I took a trip out west, and one of the stops was my friend Tess Green. If you're out there, Tess, I don't know. Tess was trying to remember, I think she was working in Jackson Hole. We all worked in radio, and she had worked for me in Richmond, Virginia. And she was a hippie. There's no other way to put it. Tess was just completely out there. I mean, she did all nights at this station that I was working at in Richmond, and she was the promotions director. And we used to have to go over to her apartment and wake her up to get her to go on the air. And then she'd go, dude, I don't want to go in because it's so late and I'm sleeping. And I'm like, no, this is your job. You're going in, and we'd have to, it was ridiculous. Anyway, she was working in Jackson Hole, and she was like, yeah, dudes, you should come out and see me. So we decided to go see her. And she decided that she wanted to take us up to Montana to go to this hot springs in Montana. Have you ever been to a hot springs? They're incredible. They are incredible. And she had, I think it was Pico Hot Springs in Montana. So we get into her Volkswagen. I had a Nova at the time. Yeah. Oh no, we're taking the Volkswagen. It was this old Volkswagen. Her older sister had gone to Vanderbilt. It still had the Vanderbilt sticker on the back window. An old yellow Mustang, and then she had attached antlers to the front, so it had this sort of Western appearance. And then we drove up into Montana to go to this hot springs, which was closed. And I remember there was a bar there with this stunning bartender, and my friend Ted just fell in love, and he sat in the bar, and me and Tess wandered around and looked at this place that was called Pappy's Hot Springs, where the pool was empty and all dried up, and I don't think it had been used in years. Well, dusk is coming on, so it's time to go. So we were probably 20 miles from the north entrance of Yellowstone, and we drove into Yellowstone. By then, the gates were open, but the kiosks were closed. And we drove into Yellowstone, and so when you come in that north entrance, I think there's sort of a line of pine trees, and you're following this straight road through these pine trees. We get about halfway down that road, and she goes, "Oh, wow, you know what? I think my gas gauge is broken. I'm pretty sure because it says it's on E, but it never runs out of gas." And at that moment, we ran out of gas. Now, it's dark. We're in Yellowstone. There's nobody around, not a soul around. So she was like, "What do we do? We're just going to have to stay here all night." And Ted and I were like, "No, we're going to push the car." So we got out, and we told Tess to just sit in the car, and we pushed the car through Yellowstone. And I remember seeing all the red eyes of the animals looking at us. I think we had a flashlight, and we'd push it for a while, and we get a downward slope, and then we jump in and we coast down the hill. And we went to that little canyon village, I think, and we parked there because there was a gas station there. It was closed. So we parked there and waited for the gas station to open in the morning, and then we filled up. And that was my Yellowstone experience many, many years ago. My point is there was no one there. It was later in the year. It wasn't cold, but it was later in the year. But at that time, and this is a number of years ago, this is probably in the 80s, I don't think there were that many people going to the national parks for some reason. So what has happened in the last years, I don't really know why, is there's so many people, and they bring the cities with them. They bring the traffic jams. They honk their horns. They tailgate. They can't wait to get from one location to the next. And I hesitate to ask the question. I know they're experiencing something, but I really don't know what they're experiencing. Which brings me to this quartzite thing. I'll close with this because I think this is important. I got here and I encountered the specter of an increase. It costs $180 to stay in long-term visitor areas run by the Bureau of Land Management, which is the Department of Interior. It's a different branch that runs the park services and the forest services. And I decided immediately I got to do a video on this. And my friend Robert, Dark Nomad, did a video on it. And Campulence Man did a video on it as well, to just let people know about the price increases. And this video has gotten over 55, probably 54,000. By the time you see this video, it's probably gotten 55,000 views. And the comments range from, "Hey, thanks for doing this," to, you know what you're talking about, or "I don't understand why it's paying $600 versus $185 is any big deal," yada, 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 or 180 or whatever it is. And I came to the conclusion, and I think I'm going to do a podcast about this. I'm no longer I've decamped from quartzite, and I'm not going to say where I am. We're not going to say where we are, because we have found a place that is completely pristine. We're the only people here for miles. And I realized last night the moon was up. It was beautiful. We had a beautiful sunset. We're looking at this beautiful desert landscape, which I won't show because I don't want people to know where I am. And I realized this is the experience that people are looking for, but they can't get it because they relegate themselves to these really almost ghettos of desperate people / RV people / $600,000 Liberty coaches boondocking, and on and on and on. And more power to people for doing what they need to do. I don't want to be a jerk, but I think that this pristine experience is what we're looking for. And I think so many people don't know how to have that experience, don't know how to get to a place like this, wouldn't get to a place like this because of the type of vehicle they're in. And I think would feel a little disconcerted because there's nobody around. You're the only person, or you're with a friend, and your group are the only people here. And this is probably what the original experience of quartzite was back in the day. And then, of course, during the peak period of time in the 80s and 90s, when there were 300,000 to 400,000, maybe more people there every year, which is what everyone thinks there is now, but there's not nearly that number. I'd be surprised if there's 20,000, to tell you the truth. That whole World War II, Korean War generation of older guys who were very disciplined in their approaches to life. They would come out and they would hang out with their friends, and then they'd go back to Chicago or Akron or wherever they were from. It's a different group of people today, and it's a whole different, and I'll talk about this again in a future podcast, but it's great when you finally get to Arizona. We'll just leave Quartzsite out of it, and you can find some place to have this pristine experience and just listen to the wind. You know, if I go over here and open up this, let me get up and open up this slot window, because that lets in a lot of air. You can just hear the wind, and I'm looking out across the desert into the mountains, and there's not a soul around. So there is a passion, and this podcast 1145 is a lot about this passion. My passion is for travel. When the wheels are turning, my creative juices are rolling. I just love to run. I mean, literally, it's a passion to drive. I don't know why. And I really enjoy that, staying in truck stops. And I did this podcast from a truck stop parking lot up in Montana or wherever I was, Wyoming, I don't even know. And the experience that I have traveling is what I think also that this experience, this pristine experience that I'm having now, which is there's nobody around and we're alone and we can do whatever we want. And I think this is what people are looking for. I think this is this moment of peace, because our world is not peaceful. Our experience in urban life is not peaceful. We have all these tools that are designed to give us peace and give us leisure, and they do nothing but overexcite us and upset us and drive us crazy. And we are living in a dream world, in this social media dream world, and we're not really fully engaged in experiencing life. And I think that's part of the reason so many people take that Labor Day weekend or take that Memorial Day weekend or take that July 4th weekend and charge hell-bent for leather into the wilderness to go to a national park and show their kids some bison or whatever. So I can't judge it negatively, because I think people are trying to give themselves and their kids some kind of an experience. But the pristine experience is the experience that the real outdoors people have when they go into these places that are completely deserted. And it's a different experience from having to deal with people running their generators, people partying too hard, people building shanties right up next to the kiosk at the LTVA with junk and then leaving, and on and on and on. We'll talk about that in a future video and a podcast. So for podcast 1145, which is kind of a travel log, I will put links in the description box. Go to thebobdavispodcast.com and you can listen to it right off the page. Also on Spotify, as well as Audible. You can ask what's your assistant there on Audible? I forgot. Anyway, you can get that podcast wherever you find your podcasts. And I've gone on long enough. Thank you for watching. Thanks for the subscriptions. We're getting close to 3,000. I'll do a short when we finally hit 3,000. And thank you all very much. That's fantastic. And thanks for the watch time. Thanks for watching all through to the end, as well as checking out the videos and commenting and so forth. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.